Hey y'all, I'm going to be doing my presentation on Excalibur. Heads up, if you haven't watched the film yet, this presentation is going to include a lot of spoilers, but it is from 1981, so I can't really feel too bad. The tale opens with your typical messy battle scene between who we find out is Uther Pendragon and the Duke of Cornwall. Knights are flying around, getting thrown off their horses, everyone's getting stabbed. It's your typical bloody battle scene. Merlin, the sorcerer, appears, and upon realizing that everyone's doing pretty poorly, I guess, calls the Lady of the Lake to bring forth Excalibur, the magical sword. And she does, and he gives it to Uther. Cornwall, impressed by the symbol of power now in Uther's hands, agrees that he should be king. And they stop fighting. Uther also promises him land, so that helped with the bromance. After they stopped fighting, they all went back to Cornwall's castle to have a big feast, and that's where things get messy again, when Cornwall asks his wife Igraine to dance for the knights. Obviously, it's a sensual dance. She's entertainment for a table full of knights. So, unfortunately, Uther ends up lusting after Igraine, his new bro's wife. Clearly, this is going to break the truce, so all of his knights tell him, no, you can't have her, it's going to ruin everything, and he says he doesn't care, he's going to have her one way or another. Is broken, and the next day he begins to attack Cornwall's castle to get to Igraine. Clearly, fighting against a stone building isn't the smartest idea, and although his men are making some headway and getting towards the castle, they're not doing great, so he calls for Merlin to help him in his attempt to get Igraine. Merlin agrees, but only under the condition that he gets the product of Uther's lust, aka, if there's a baby made, he gets that baby. Surprise, that baby ends up being Arthur. So Merlin casts a spell that makes Uther look like Cornwall, and as Uther's men set kind of a trap and draw Cornwall and his men out of the castle, Uther sneaks in under the disguise of being Cornwall and finds Igraine. Thinking that this man is her husband, she then sleeps with him, as her real husband is taking his last breaths impaled on a bunch of swords outside of the castle. Forward 9 months, she has a baby. Upon the agreement, being at its new stage, Uther takes the baby and goes to give it to Merlin, who hasn't been seen in the last 9 months since Cornwall died. As Igraine is screaming, crying, and Merlin is taking her baby off into the forest, Uther decides, hey, that probably wasn't the best move, and he goes after Merlin to try and get the baby back. Cornwall's men see him and end up attacking him, and he is mortally wounded, but right before he dies, he takes Excalibur and thrusts it into a stone, declaring that no one should have the sword but him. Sneaky little Merlin is still in the trees, and he's watching all of this happen, so he casts a spell declaring that Arthur, upon reaching the right age, will be able to get the sword out of the stone. Forward 16 years, Arthur is now a 16-year-old boy, and he is one day at a jousting tournament with Sir Kay and who he thinks is his father. As it's getting near Kay's time to fight, he realizes that Arthur forgot his sword, so Arthur goes back to their tent to try and find it. He doesn't have it, someone stole it. As he's following who he thinks is the person who stole the sword, he happens upon Excalibur stuck in the stone, and realizing that he can't get this other sword back for his brother, decides this is the sword he's going to use. When he draws the sword from the stone, there's no one really around watching it, so he doesn't know that it's important, and then Kay shows up and realizes what he's done, and tries to claim the sword being drawn from the stone is his own doing, and then realizes that's wrong, and that he should tell everyone Arthur did it. So he does, and everyone in the little town starts to rejoice, saying, the boy drew this sword from the stone, he's the chosen one, this is our new king. Everyone gets really excited. Other knights try to get the sword out of the stone once Arthur puts it back in, as like a proving point, I am assuming, and clearly no one else can. So it's declared that Arthur is now the king. It's a 2-hour and 20-minute movie, so clearly a lot more happens once Arthur removes the sword from the stone. But what I chose to focus on was a scene that happened later on in the movie between Lancelot and King Arthur. So, one day, King Arthur is out riding with his knights. Everything's great in Camelot. He wins all of his battles. Everyone's fed well. Everyone's happy. Life's great. His knights are trying to cross this bridge that's defended by one singular knight, who we find out is Lancelot, and no one can beat him. He is unbeatable by every knight that Arthur has. So Arthur demands that he's going to be the one who fights Lancelot, and he will win. Even though he's not technically supposed to do this, he's not supposed to fight as a single man in a battle. He's the king, so it matters if he dies. He does it anyway, because his pride gets the best of him. And this is what happens in the scene.
Move aside! This is the king's road, and the knights you joined arms against for his very own. I await the king himself. His knights are in need of training. I am king. And this is Excalibur, sword of kings from the dawn of time. Who are you? What do you seek? I am Lancelot of the Lake, from across the sea. And I have yet to find a king worthy of my sword. That is a wild boast. You lack a knight's humility. Not a boast, sir, but a curse. For I have never met my match in joust or duel. Move aside. I will not. You must retreat, or prove your worth in the test of arms under the eyes of God. And may he give me the strength to unhorse you and send you with one blow back across the sea. Then come across, sir. You joust well, sir. I offer you another lance. Yes, another lance.
Side note, I think that sword call was my favorite part of the entire movie.
I have the advantage. I will not fight me from your horse or on foot, but fight me, your avoidance mocks me. I sought only not to harm you.
So here we see Uther's rage and pride getting the best of him, and even though Lancelot is on a horse, clearly at the advantage, he's still trying to fight him.
Your rage has unbalanced you. You, sir, would fight to the death against a knight who is not your enemy. For a stretch of road you could easily ride around. So be it. To the death.
tell from this battle, obviously, that Lancelot was the better knight. He was going to beat Arthur until Arthur called upon the power of Excalibur to help him win. And we find out that this was a huge no-no. You don't call upon Excalibur to change the fate of a battle that was already going to be won by someone else. To ask the sword to do something wrong is not what it was meant to do. So, Lancelot laying there, what we assume to be dead, Arthur realizes he broke the sword. And this is a huge, huge mistake, because this sword has been around for so long and apparently has this legend of great kings and knights using it, and he realizes that he broke it, and he should never have broken it to begin with. Appears out of nowhere, as Merlin does, and realizes what Arthur's done, and asks him, why? How could you have done that? And Arthur goes on this long, repentance of realizing what he did wrong, and how he messed up, and how he's not deserving of ever being king or holding this sword again, and he throws the sword into the lake. As he's apologizing for what he's done, the Lady of the Lake appears and returns the sword whole, no longer broken, and holds it out of the water for King Arthur to take. And he does. As he removes the sword from the water, Lancelot comes back to life and swears his allegiance to Arthur as his king, and the men start this lifelong bond of brothership. The reason I chose this portion of the film is because I felt it was extremely important in the entire story, because it's the first time we see Lancelot and Arthur forming this relationship that they have for the rest of their lives. Towards the end of the film, we see them dying, screaming each other's names, trying to find each other. So they're good bros. They have been their entire life, despite the fact that Lancelot ends up sleeping with Arthur's wife. This scene was also important because it was one of the only in the film that portrayed two men fighting against each other one-on-one, rather than a big battle between many men on behalf of one man. So it's not collective fighting action between hundreds of knights killing each other, it's just Lancelot and Arthur battling it out to see who is the better knight. We also see in the scene the strength of Excalibur and what exactly this sword can do. It broke through Lancelot's sword and struck him down, what we thought was killing him. And it also shows the weakness of man. King Arthur allowed his pride and his anger and his rage to get the best of him, and to call the sword to do something that he knew was wrong. He knew Lancelot was the better knight, and he knew he was going to win this fight, but because he had this magical sword, he felt he had the right to call upon its magic to defeat his opponent. This scene also helps us realize the importance of recognizing your wrongs, because had Arthur not apologized for what he'd done and not repented for the mistake that he made, the Lady of the Lake probably would not have returned the sword, which would have destroyed the legend of Excalibur, and we don't know if Lancelot would have come back to life or come out of his coma or whatever was happening with him. So this scene in the movie reinforces the power of this sword that has this legend and follows throughout all of medieval romances. And clearly it's important because the sword is what everyone's fighting over the entire movie. This scene also emphasizes the tale of Lady of the Lake. She appears at the beginning of the movie, slightly, and then again at the end. The final scene is her rising out of the water to get the sword when it's thrown in. But this scene really emphasizes the power of the Lady of the Lake and how she can fix anything that went wrong with Excalibur. So, to reiterate, although this scene is only about 4.5 minutes out of this entire movie, it's really important because it gives birth to one of the most well-known bonds between a knight and his king, Arthur and Lancelot. And it shows Arthur's shortcomings as a knight, a king, and as a man, which helps humanize him in a tale that normally places him on a godlike pedestal. This scene also shows how the legend of Excalibur almost came to an end due to this man's weakness, and how bad life in Camelot would have been if the sword was lost. And it finally proves the magic of the Lady of the Lake, which is crucial understanding the end of the story when she rises from the water one last time to get the sword as Arthur takes his last breath. Discussion questions are: if the situation was reversed and Lancelot had the sword instead of Arthur, has his character thus far shown us that he would use it in the same evil way, or would he have relented and ended the battle fairly? How do you think the story would change if Excalibur had remained broken forever? And does the formation of their bond, beginning as a battle, reflect how their relationship grew over the years? Thank you.